I thought my husband was cheating. The truth was much darker, part one. Signs I couldn't ignore. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who snoops through her husband's phone. I used to judge women like that until I became one. It started. Subtly. Evan, my husband of 5 years, began coming home later than usual. At first, it was work, always work. A new project, late meetings, a tough quarter. I believed him because I always had. He's a software engineer. Long hours weren't unusual, but then things shifted. He started guarding his phone like it was state property. It used to sit face up on the coffee table while we watched TV. Now it was either in his pocket or face down and locked. With a new PASSCODE dot, the first time I asked why he changed it, he gave me a tired smile. Security stuff for work. You know how strict they're getting with privacy? Reasonable dot two, reasonable dot, then came the missed calls. The bathroom breaks that lasted 10 minutes longer than they should have. The faint scent of perfume on his collar, one I didn't wear. One I didn't even recognize. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I started noticing everything I didn't. Teaming to become obsessed. But I started writing things down, times, dates, how often he left the house, and what he said he was doing. At first, it was just to keep track. That's what I told myself. Like I was investigating a mystery that probably didn't exist. But the more I recorded, the more the patterns emerged. He was disappearing for walks late at night. Our intimacy had dried up almost completely. He flinched when I touched his phone or walked too close behind him. He started saying I was paranoid when I asked simple questions like, "Who were you texting?" That word paranoid made me feel like I was losing my mind. But then I found the receipt. The first hard clue was crumpled in his jacket pocket. I was doing laundry. I wasn't snooping, just checking for tissues and gum wrappers before washing. It was a receipt from a hotel. Not one we had ever stayed in. Just one night. A room, a bottle of wine, and a two-person dinner from the bar. I stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and slipping it into my robe pocket. I didn't confront him right away. I needed more. Enter. The burner phone 3. Nights later, I followed him. I'd never done anything like it before. I told him I had a late yoga class, kissed him goodbye, and waited in my car down the block. When he pulled out of the driveway, I followed. He drove 15 minutes to a strip mall, parked behind the building, and walked around the back entrance. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, I crept out of the car and walked toward the building. It was a nondescript wellness. Centered dimmed windows, barely any signage. But when I looked through the cracks of the curtain, what I saw made no sense. It wasn't a spa or a clinic. It looked like a meeting room. There were chairs in a circle, a whiteboard, a table with water bottles and name tags. What the hell was this? Evan came out 20 minutes later, looking relaxed, peaceful, even. He didn't notice me as he got in his car and drove away. When I got home, I asked how his evening was. Went for a walk, he said. Needed to clear my head. I nodded and said nothing. Because now I was sure he was hiding something. The turning point the next night. I did the unthinkable. While he was in the shower, I unlocked his laptop. I didn't have the new passcode to his phone, but his laptop still autofilled some of his apps. And that's when I found an email from a woman named Ava. At first, it looked innocent. They were talking about meetings, about feelings, but then the language changed. She asked him how he was handling the temptation. She said she was proud of him. She reminded him he was strong, that he was more than his urges. Urges? I stopped breathing. Then I saw a meeting confirmation for Shadow Healing Group, room 3B. The same wellness center from the strip mall. The rabbit hole deepened. What was he hiding? I couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't an affair. At least, not the kind I expected. But it also wasn't just a support group. The language was strange, euphemistic, like they were talking in code. I Googled the group name. Nothing. I looked up the woman. No last name, no profile, no public footprint. It was like they didn't exist. That night, Evan held me in bed like he hadn't in months. He kissed my neck. He said he was sorry for being distant lately. Said he was going through something and would explain it soon. That he just needed time. I almost cried because I didn't know whether to believe him or to keep digging. I made a choice. I went back to the wellness center 2 days later, this time during daylight hours. I pretended to be interested in shadow work, whatever that was. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, handed me a pamphlet. I glanced through it, thought it was vague, talking about emotional integration, impulse regulation, and inner archetype confrontation. There was a list of groups: anger management, grief recovery, compulsive behavior, trauma response, and one simply labeled the Dark Mirror program, private clients only, application required. My heart pounded. What the hell was this? When he finally told me that night, I confronted Evan. I didn't yell. I just said, "What's the Dark Mirror program?" He froze. All the blood drained from his face. Then, slowly, he sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked like a man unraveling. "I didn't cheat on you," he said softly, and then he told me something I will never forget. Part 2. I didn't cheat on you, Evan repeated. His voice almost too soft to hear. We sat there in the quiet of our bedroom, the ticking of the clock louder than his confession. His hands were folded tightly between his knees, knuckles pale. I didn't know what to expect, but what he said next knocked the air out of my lungs. I was addicted to something darker than an affair. He took a deep breath. It started years ago, before I met you, before I even knew how bad it was getting. I didn't know how to stop, and I hid it from everyone. I thought marriage would fix it. That love would be enough. But it wasn't. My brain scrambled for understanding. I wanted to ask, what were you addicted to? But the words froze in my throat. I'm not a drug user, he said quickly, sensing my thought. And I've never laid a hand on anyone. But what was going on inside me, it wasn't safe. Not for me, and definitely not for you. I waited. Finally whispered the words. I had an addiction to violent sexual content. I blinked. I don't even know if I breathed. I sat completely still, trying to process what I'd just heard. He kept talking. It started online. Like for a lot of guys, I guess, just regular stuff. And then it escalated. I started looking for more extreme material. Things I didn't even agree with morally, things that disgusted me after the fact. But in the moment, I couldn't stop. He looked up at me, eyes wet. I never acted on anything. But I was scared of what I was becoming. That's why I joined the Dark Mirror program. It's for people like me, men who are terrified of what's in their own minds. I felt cold all over. Not because I thought he'd done something, but because I realized he'd been fighting a war I never even saw, and he was losing. I asked why he didn't tell me sooner. He said, because I thought you'd leave me. And part of me thought, maybe I deserved it. The room was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. I was scared, yes, but not in the way I'd feared before. Not of betrayal, but of the unknown. Of what it meant to love someone whose mind had turned against them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But more than anything, I wanted to understand. Part 3. Into the dark mirror after that night. Everything changed between us. The truth was out. But the truth wasn't neat or satisfying. It was jagged. It hurt to hold. And it raised more questions than it answered. For the first few days, we barely spoke. Not because we were angry, but because we were both raw, stripped down, exposed in a way that felt unbearable. Evan stayed home from work. He said he needed time to reset. I gave it to him, but I also watched him carefully, like he might break sometimes. I caught him just staring out the window, or gripping the edge of the kitchen counter until his knuckles went white. I didn't know how to help. So I started researching. I went looking for answers. I searched online for everything I could about sexual compulsion, hyperfixation, dark urges, support program, anything that would help me understand what he was dealing with, but the resources were either too vague or too clinical. Everything described men who were either predators or saints. There was no in between, no real world, no gray area. But Evan lived in the gray. I thought about what he said. how the content disgusted him after the fact, how he hated himself for what he was drawn to. It made me sick to even type those kinds of things into a search bar. But I had to try. That's when I found the forum, a support board. Anonymous users talking about compulsions they were terrified to admit to in real life. I read posts that chilled me to the bone and others that made me cry with empathy. One person said, "We're not all monsters. Some of us are trying not to become one." That line stuck with me because I realized that was what Evan had been doing all along. I asked if I could join him. I waited until the third day before I brought it up. "Can I go with you?" I asked to one of the sessions. He looked startled. "You don't want to hear what's said in those rooms?" "Maybe not, but I want to understand." He hesitated for a long time, then finally nodded, just once. The meeting that changed everything. We arrived just before 7 p.m. at the same wellness center. I recognized the building immediately, the shadowed entrance, the thick curtains. There were maybe 10 people in the room, mostly men. A few looked like they'd come straight from the office. Others looked hollowed out, like they hadn't slept in days. There was one woman, mid-30s, strong eyes, sitting alone in the corner. The facilitator was a woman named Ava, the one from the emails. She greeted Evan warmly, then looked at me. "This is your partner?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "But I need you to understand this is a space for accountability, and not all of it will be easy to hear." "I understand," I said. I didn't, not really. But I wanted to. The rawest things I ever heard this session began. They went around the room, sharing check-ins. I had a relapse this week. Back on the forums, I deleted everything again. I almost followed a woman at the store. I didn't. I made myself sit in the car until it passed. I told my wife about my thoughts. She left. Each voice was like a punch to the chest. They weren't defending their urges. They were terrified of them, fighting them like they were a disease living inside their own skulls. Even spoke last. He said, "My wife knows now." I told her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Everyone nodded. A few offered gentle words. One man whispered, "You're still here. That means something." I didn't cry in the session. I held it in. But on the way home, I broke. Not because I was afraid of Evan, but because I realized just how close I'd come to losing him, not to another woman, but to something much worse. Part 4. The shadows between us after the session. We didn't talk in the car. Not a word. I think we both needed silence. But even in the quiet, my mind was loud. There was a question growing inside me, gnawing at the edge of my chest like a restless animal. Could I ever fully trust him again? And worse, could he trust himself? I saw everything differently now suddenly. The smallest details took on new weight. If he stayed up late at night, I wondered, what was he watching? If he scrolled through his phone too long, my stomach tightened. Even though I knew he was trying going to therapy, being open, sharing it, didn't erase the fear. It coexisted with everything else. That I hated that. I hated feeling like I had to watch him. And I hated that he felt like he had to prove himself constantly. One evening, he caught me glancing at his phone while we were watching TV. He didn't get mad. He just quietly set it face up on the coffee table and said, "I get it." And that broke me more than any lie ever could have. The woman from the group. A few days later, I got an email from Ava, the group facilitator. She wrote, "I just wanted to thank you for showing up. Partners rarely do." It meant a lot to Evan, even if he doesn't say it. And then she added something else. "If you'd ever like to talk woman to woman, I'm here. Not as a therapist, just someone who's been through it." That line stuck with me because someone who's been through it meant I wasn't alone. I replied the next day. We met for coffee that weekend. And it changed everything. Ava had been married once. Her husband's addiction wasn't sexual, it was to rage, to control. But the patterns of shame, secrecy, and self-hatred were familiar. You start to question yourself, she said. You wonder, was it me? Did I not see it? Did I enable it? I nodded, hard. I blamed myself for a long time, she said. But Healing starts with understanding that we are not responsible for the lies people tell themselves. That hit me in the chest like a stone, a hard conversation that night. I sat down with Evan Dot. I told him I was proud of his progress, that I believed he was trying, but I also told him I was still scared. I need to know, I said, that you want to get better for you, not just because I found out, not because you're afraid I'll leave. He looked me in the eyes and said, I want to be someone I'm not ashamed of. Even if you left me tomorrow, I'd still want that. I believed him. Dot, maybe for the first time, I truly did. The real twist wasn't about cheating. All that time I thought he was cheating. I was wrong that it wasn't about another woman, that it was about a version of himself. He hated so deeply that he would rather lose everything than let it be seen. And I realized something terrifying and beautiful. The real danger was never the betrayal, Dot. It was the silence. Part 5, the quiet rebuild. There's no playbook for what comes after a confession like Evan's Dot, no guide titled. So your husband isn't cheating. He's battling a secret addiction instead. The days that followed weren't cinematic. Dot. There were no grand apologies, no tearful montages of healing. Dot. Just little things, awkward things, tender things. We had to learn each other again. One morning, he started making me coffee again, something he used to do before everything fell apart. He didn't say anything about it, just left it on the nightstand. Like he used to, I held the cup for a long time before drinking. Dot. Later that day, I caught him folding laundry in my laundry and carefully setting aside the socks I like to wear around the house. I don't know why that broke me, but it did. Dot. It wasn't the laundry. Dot. It was the trying. Dot. Trust isn't rebuilt with promises. It's rebuilt with patterns. Dot. There was no single moment that made me think, yes, I trust him again. But over time, things softened. He started giving me full access to his digital life. Not because I asked, but because he wanted transparency. Offered to show me his therapy notes. I declined. But it mattered that he offered. He'd leave his phone face up, even when texting friends. He didn't flinch when I walked in on him working on his laptop. Dot. And slowly, I stopped checking because he stopped hiding. But it wasn't just about him anymore at some point. I realized I needed help too. All my energy had gone into protecting him, understanding him, navigating his shame. But I had my own. The shame of not seeing it sooner. The guilt of accusing him. Something he didn't do. Dot. The lingering voice in my head that whispered, you're just staying because you're afraid to start over. So I found a therapist, someone who specialized in relationship trauma and betrayal, not just infidelity. She helped me understand something vital. What happened wasn't my fault, but how I heal from it is my responsibility, the most unexpected part. The more Evan healed, the more honest we became, not just about the addiction, but about everything. Dot. We started having deeper conversations than we ever had in our perfect phase, real ones, messy ones. He told me things he'd never said aloud, about growing up in a household where emotion was weakness, about learning to bottle up discomfort instead of express it. Told him about how my dad used to disappear for days without explanation, and how that taught me to always expect abandonment. And in those moments, we weren't husband and wife. We were just two broken kids who'd somehow found each other as adults. I thought the darkness would break us, but instead, it stripped away everything false. And what was left, what we had to rebuild from scratch, was more honest than anything we had before. Dot. It didn't mean the fear was gone, but it meant we were facing it together. Part 6, the room without locks there, was a moment about 3 months after Evan's confession that I still think about. Dot. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No tears. Dot. It was just the two of us sitting on the floor, building an IKEA bookshelf, laughing over which screw went where, fighting with the stupid Allen key. He looked up and said, this feels real. I asked what he meant. He said, before, it always felt like I was pretending to be someone you could love. Now, I feel like myself, and you're still here. That was the moment I knew. We were no longer healing toward the past. We were building something new. Dot. The room he hid from me. A few weeks later, Evan did something that caught me completely off guard. He handed me a key. To what? I asked. He led me to the small annex space above the garage. I didn't even realize it locked until I saw the keyhole. Dot inside was a cluttered mess of old files, broken texts, some books I didn't recognize, and a safe. He opened the safe and pulled out a worn leather journal. Dot, he handed it to me and said, "This is everything I never said." The journal was a map of his mind. I spent 2 days reading it in pieces. Dot. It wasn't linear. It jumped from dreams to therapy notes to confessions that made my stomach twist. Dot. There were pages where he hated himself, others where he tried to justify his darker thoughts, some where he begged God to fix whatever was broken, and then a few near the end that were just about me. Little moments he wrote down because he was afraid he'd lose them, like how I curled my toes when I laughed, or the way I always smelled like lemon and rosemary. After a shower. Dot. It was haunting, but it was also human. He wasn't hiding in the room anymore. He was inviting me in. What I realized reading that journal. He had already grieved the man he used to be, but I hadn't. I was still trying to reconcile the husband I thought I married with the one who stood in front of me now. That journal helped me bury the version of him I'd imagined. Dot. And start loving the one who was finally being real with me. Dot. And then something unthinkable happened. It had been nearly 5 months since everything came out. We were doing well until one night Evan came home. Quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I don't want to, but I promised I would. My heart stopped. He said he had a slip. He didn't seek out the darkest content, but he clicked. Something he shouldn't have. Dot. It started with a Reddit thread. Just curiosity. Then a video. Dot. Then guilt. He closed it fast. Didn't linger. But it still happened. He told me the exact timeline, the triggers, the thought process. I know it doesn't erase it, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Relapse isn't the end. Silence is. Dot. We sat on the floor that night, same as the night we built the shelf. This time we weren't laughing, but we were still together. I told him that I was angry, that I was hurt, but more than that, I was proud of him for telling me before the lie could grow. We agreed to up his therapy frequency, and we agreed on a new rule: no more hiding. Even if the truth is ugly, especially then, the day after the slip. The next morning felt strange, not in the way you feel after a fight or dramatic confrontation, but like the house itself was holding its breath. I woke up before Evan and just lay there staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry in the way I expected to be. I was sad, yes, and tired, but I wasn't boiling. I realized maybe that was growth, because a few months ago, this would have shattered me. But now, it just bent me. Dot. And bending, I think, is how you survive. I needed space, but not distance, that day. I told Evan I was going for a walk by myself. I needed to move my body, to hear the world again. The birds, the wind, things that didn't lie. He nodded. Didn't follow, didn't push. On my walk, I passed a little girl walking her dog. She waved. I waved back, and out of nowhere, tears came. Not because of Evan's mistake, but because in that moment, I realized something. Healing isn't linear, but honesty can still be constant, and that had to count for something. Later that night, we talked again. Evan cooked dinner, grilled salmon, rice, and green beans. He knows that's my comfort meal. That we sat down at the table in silence. And then I said it. You didn't lose me. His eyes filled instantly. But we're not just going to pretend this didn't happen either. He nodded. I don't expect. You too, he whispered. But I'm going to keep trying. Even when I fail. Especially then. It was the most human thing he could have said. This time, I set a boundary as much as I appreciated his honesty. I knew I had to protect my own heart. Two. Dot. So I told him we'd take a break from physical intimacy, not as punishment, but as space. I needed to feel emotionally safe again first. He understood. There was no protest. Just a quiet, thank you for telling me what you need. It was the healthiest conversation we'd had in months. A new kind of love. There's a kind of love that comes easy. The honeymoon phase. The effortless giggles, the playful text. Dot then there's a kind that is rebuilt. This second kind, it's quieter. It's slower. It demands honesty even when it's inconvenient, but it's also deeper because you don't just choose them once. You choose them again and again. Even when it's hard. Dot, we built rituals. Evan and I started doing check-in Sundays. Every week, we'd sit down for 20 minutes and ask three questions. How are you really feeling? What scared you this week? What did you need that you didn't ask for? Sometimes it led to tears. Sometimes we laughed. But every time, it reminded us that we were still showing up. Not perfectly, but fully. The thing I never expected. I used to think trust was something people gave or lost, like a gift or a punishment. But now I see trust as a muscle that it weakens when neglected, that it strengthens through repetition, and it always needs attention. Evan's slip didn't ruin us. His truth saved us. Part 7. The truth. In the light, it had been almost a year since the day I thought Evan was cheating. A year since that spiral of suspicion, the quiet breakdown, and the shocking truth. In some ways, it felt like a lifetime ago. In others, like I was still peeling off the dust from that explosion. But something had changed, not just between Evan and me, but inside me. I didn't just feel like a woman who had survived something. I felt like a woman who had reclaimed something. Rebuilding wasn't the goal anymore. For so long, all my focus had been on saving our marriage, making sure it didn't fall apart. But now I didn't want to just save something. I wanted to build something better, something neither of us had known how to ask for before. A relationship where silence wasn't considered peace, where vulnerability wasn't seen as weakness, where we didn't have to pretend anymore. The final test came quietly one evening in late fall. Even came to me with something behind his back. I have a question, he said. My stomach tensed. He pulled out a small black box. Inside was a necklace, not fancy, not flashy, just a simple pendant in the shape of a key. I know I broke your trust, he said, and I know we've spent the last year rebuilding. But if you're willing, I'd like to make a new vow. I blinked. He didn't propose again. He didn't make promises. He just said, I vow to never lock you out again. Of anything. I wore the necklace every day after that. What happened to the darkness? People ask me if I ever truly got over what happened. The truth? No, but that's okay. Because the goal was never to erase the past. It was to grow around it. Like roots that had to twist around stone to keep reaching for the light. Evan still goes to therapy. I still have moments where my mind asks, what if it happens again? But we talk. We hold space. We breathe through it. Together. What I know now, suspicion is loud, but intuition is wiser. Love is not the absence of secrets, but the courage to face them. Healing isn't pretty, but it's always worth the mess. And sometimes the thing you thought would destroy you ends up revealing your strength. Final thought. I thought my husband was cheating, but the truth was darker. More painful. And somehow more redeemable. Because the truth, no matter how ugly, gave us the chance to rebuild our lives with honesty. And that's the kind of story I'll never stop telling.